Nearly 20 years before the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, the United States faced a wave of domestic terrorism. Violent extremists unleashed a series of bank robberies, bombings, escalating acts of destruction, and even murder. The FBI's anti-terror experts joined forces with state police to put an end to the radical group before their attacks became even more frequent and deadly. During the 1970s, a surge of bank heists and bombings spread fear along the East Coast. This was a new kind of criminal threat: homegrown terrorists. "I'm Jim Carlstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office," he says. "For nearly a decade, these self-proclaimed revolutionaries operated underground. Our top priority was to stop them once and for all." One of the many incidents that escalated the hunt for these radicals took place along a remote stretch of highway in northern New Jersey. On December 21st, 1981, Philip Lamonaco of the New Jersey State Police was conducting a routine traffic stop. The driver appeared nervous. When it became clear he was armed, Lamonaco acted quickly. Hands on the wheel, license on the dashboard. Step out of the car. Hands up, against the vehicle. Don't move. Do you have any other weapons? Lamonaco's training kicked in as he attempted to control the situation. A passing motorist later noticed a patrol car, eerily empty, and pulled over to check if everything was all right. What he found was a chilling sight. Lamonaco lay motionless in the snow. Grabbing the police radio, the civilian called for backup. "This is dispatch. Identify yourself." "I'm on Interstate 80 in a patrol car." The dispatcher in Blairstown hesitated. A civilian was using police communications. Something was very wrong. "The officer is down. He's been shot and isn't moving. Stay in your vehicle. Help is on the way." Within moments, law enforcement from across the region was mobilized. Major Charles Coe of the New Jersey State Police recalls, "Every officer on duty rushed to the scene. We all started as patrolmen. We knew the risks, but no one ever thinks it will happen to them, especially not someone like Phil." Lamonaco was more than just a cop. He was a legend in the department, a mentor to many. When Lieutenant Richard Ryan arrived at the scene, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The first shot hit him in the chest. He was wearing a bulletproof vest, but the impact caused him to twist slightly. That's when a second bullet struck him under the arm, directly into his heart. Investigators combed the area for evidence. They found Lamonaco's service weapon, its chamber empty. He had fought until his last breath. Lieutenant John Mandrace scoured the crime scene and uncovered crucial clues. "I found shattered glass in 12 shell casings, 9mm rounds, in the snow. Given the number of shots fired, it was clear the gunman had used a semi-automatic pistol. The weapon, however, was missing." Meanwhile, paramedics rushed Lamonaco to the hospital as a massive manhunt unfolded. Over 250 officers from New Jersey and Pennsylvania set up roadblocks, stopping vehicles and questioning drivers. One witness recalled seeing two men speeding away from the crime scene in a '77 Chevy Nova with Connecticut plates. The police wasted no time. Roadblocks sprang up along the Delaware River, on highways and down back roads. The public response was overwhelming. Citizens flooded hotlines with tips, eager to assist in tracking down the killers. After several hours, a truck driver and a patrol officer discovered the abandoned Nova, just 5 kilometers from where Lamonaco had been gunned down. Detectives searched the vehicle, noting an empty holster inside. Bullet holes riddled the car's body. The windshield was shattered, suggesting that the officer had returned fire, aiming at the passenger. From the evidence, investigators concluded that it was likely the passenger who had shot and killed Lamonaco, while the driver had been desperate to ditch the vehicle. In his haste, however, he left behind a critical piece of evidence. On the dashboard lay a Connecticut driver's license, issued to a Barry Eastbury. At last, authorities had a name. But was it real? Armed with the name Barry Eastbury, investigators wasted no time tracking down his listed address. Accompanied by another patrol officer, Lieutenant Ryan left the crime scene and headed straight to Connecticut. The address led them to downtown New Haven, but instead of a residence, they found a hotel. It was a dead end. By morning, the FBI had joined the investigation. That's when they made a startling discovery. Just months earlier, agents had visited the same hotel while looking for a suspect named Raymond Levasseur, one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. Levasseur was believed to be the leader of a violent radical group known as the Sam Melville/Jonathan Jackson Unit. The FBI suspected this group of orchestrating numerous bank robberies and bombings. Now, investigators wondered, could they also be responsible for the murder of Philip Lamonaco? A forensic team was brought in to compare fingerprints found in the abandoned Chevy Nova with those on file for Levasseur. To their surprise, the prints didn't match. The results made no sense. Had they misidentified the suspects? Was the real shooter still out there? Then one agent decided to take a closer look at Levasseur's wanted poster. At the bottom, in small print, a crucial detail stood out: maybe traveling with Thomas William Manning. When agents examined Manning's file, their suspicions deepened. The photo on his record matched the man identified as Barry Eastbury. A forensic comparison of fingerprints confirmed their theory. Eastbury was an alias. If Manning was involved in Lamonaco's murder, the investigators were now dealing with an exceptionally dangerous criminal. The FBI's records revealed that Manning and Levasseur had met in prison while serving time for drug offenses, illegal weapons possession, and armed robbery. Upon release, they formed a radical leftist group, the Melville Jackson Unit. Special Agent Leonard Cross explained. They were deeply familiar with guerrilla warfare tactics. They studied insurgency manuals and absorbed the rhetoric of radical left-wing movements from the 1960s and early 70s. Between 1976 and 1979, the group launched a reign of terror. They were linked to 7 bombings across Massachusetts and New York, including attacks on 2 courthouses, the Middlesex County Courthouse in Lowell, Massachusetts, and the Suffolk County Courthouse in Boston. The courthouse bombings injured 22 people. The Melville Jackson Unit targeted government institutions and corporate entities, claiming to fight against what they saw as government oppression and corporate greed. Their beliefs were evident in their propaganda. FBI Special Agent Peterson, one of the lead investigators, saw things differently. They liked to think of themselves as champions of the oppressed. But in reality, they never helped anyone. Their only mission was violence. Agents believed the group financed their operations through meticulously planned bank heists, executed with military precision. These weren't ordinary criminals, Peterson noted. They were an organized network of violent extremists committing major crimes across New England. And the most serious of all was the murder of Philip Lamonaco. Just days after the tragic shooting, more than 2,000 officers from multiple states gathered to honor Philip Lamonaco at his funeral. The outpouring of support overwhelmed his widow, Donna. I was stunned, she recalled. As we approached the church, cars were parked nearly a mile away. So many people had come to pay their respects. Lamonaco was widely respected across New Jersey. He was a dedicated officer, deeply committed to his job, and he had trained many of the younger patrolmen. He was one of the good ones, a fellow officer said. He had integrity. He was a mentor. At the funeral, Colonel Clinton Pagano of the New Jersey State Police made Donna's solemn vow: "We will do everything in our power to bring the people who did this to justice." Donna believed him. "I saw in his eyes," she said. "I knew they would catch them, no matter what it took." The hunt was on. With a renewed sense of urgency, the FBI and the New Jersey State Police intensified their hunt for the extremists behind the murder of Philip Lamonaco. The multi-agency task force set up headquarters in the government building, working tirelessly to track down Thomas Manning, Raymond Levasseur, and their associates. Investigators combed through dozens of leads, questioning gun shop owners in hopes of finding someone who had sold 9mm ammunition, the same caliber used to kill Lamonaco, to a suspect named Barry Eastbury. Then, a breakthrough, across the Delaware River in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. A gun store owner recalled selling 9mm rounds to a man named Barry Easterly. The name was slightly different, but the similarity was too striking to ignore. Even more significant, the purchase had occurred just months before Lamonaco's murder. This suggested that the suspects weren't just passing through the area, a New Jersey detective explained. They were living here. The team doubled down on their search efforts. Days later, a landlord from Stroudsburg called the police with an unusual complaint. A tenant had abandoned a rental home, leaving behind a dog and all of their belongings. The name on the lease? Barry Easterly. The landlord's tip led the FBI's SWAT team to the abandoned rental home. As they entered, it became clear that the occupants had fled in a hurry. They left behind clothes, family photos, even their dog, an agent recalled. What investigators did find, however, was chilling. Inside one of the rooms, officers uncovered radical literature, a hand-drawn logo featuring an AK-47 assault rifle and an arsenal of bomb-making materials. This wasn't just a hideout, Special Agent Cross noted. This was a domestic terrorist command center. The biggest find? A stash of 9mm bullets, the same kind used to kill Philip Lamonaco. The house had been home to Thomas Manning, his wife, and their children at the time of the murder. Detectives also stumbled upon detailed plans for an upcoming bank robbery in Allentown, Pennsylvania, along with documents referencing a previous robbery where multiple officers had been killed. They had left behind evidence of their entire operation. A detective said it was like finding their playbook. In another room, Sergeant Tom Evans discovered a notebook filled with phone numbers. "We copied down every number," he explained. There were no names, just aliases, and none of the numbers had area codes. Among the scattered belongings, officers also found a photograph of an unidentified man. According to the landlord, the children in the house referred to the man as Uncle David. Was he involved in Lamonaco's murder? Could he have been the passenger in the Chevy Nova, the man who pulled the trigger? At this point, the case was no longer just about one police shooting. The investigation had evolved into a full-scale hunt for a domestic terrorist network. Among the many numbers in the confiscated notebook, one stood out. Next to a Boston-based phone number, there was a simple note, Rent $275. The FBI tracked the number to a Boston real estate company that leased apartments. When agents visited the property manager, they asked him if he recognized the suspect's photo. The manager shrugged. "I don't see the tenants much. They just mail the rent checks." It seemed like another dead end, until investigators dug deeper. Near the real estate office's number, there was an additional handwritten note, 275. "Do you rent any units for $275 a month?" An agent asked. The manager flipped through his records. "Only one. It's empty right now. We just started renovations." Immediately, investigators rushed to the apartment. They halted all renovation work and called in a forensic team. Even though the unit had been cleaned, agents searched in less obvious places, behind the toilet, inside light fixtures, and struck gold. They found fingerprints. The question now was, whose were they? With new evidence in hand, investigators tracked down the building's former maintenance worker and asked if he had any information about the tenant. "I didn't know much about him," the man admitted, "but you should talk to his girlfriend." The next morning, the FBI found and questioned the woman. Though she refused to give up her boyfriend's identity, she slipped up. She mentioned his stepfather. Following this lead, Sergeant Evans drove to a suburb outside of Boston and knocked on the stepfather's door. He held up a photo of the suspect. "What has Dickie done now?" the older man asked. Evans pressed for details. "Dickie? Yeah, Richard Charles Williams." Investigators immediately ran Williams' name through their database. The fingerprint comparison came back as a perfect match. The second man in the Chevy Nova, the one suspected of pulling the trigger on Philip Lamonaco, had finally been identified. Richard Williams was now officially a wanted man for the murder of a police officer. Identifying Richard Williams as the second suspect in Philip Lamonaco's murder was a major breakthrough, but capturing him and his accomplices remained a daunting challenge. These individuals weren't just hiding. They operated under strict rules of secrecy, using fake identities, rented mailboxes, and temporary apartments to constantly change locations. The FBI and law enforcement agencies across New England worked together to track down Thomas Manning, Raymond Levasseur, and Richard Williams. Special Agent John Peterson was assigned to assist the New Jersey police in locating the fugitives. According to him, the investigation took a new turn, analyzing every available detail about the radicals' lifestyle to predict their next moves. Agents carefully examined their previous hideouts, movement patterns, bombing locations, and bank heists. Over time, a clear pattern emerged. Their activities were concentrated in 4 states: New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Connecticut. In the spring of 1984, the FBI launched Operation Western Sweep, a large-scale effort to encircle and capture the terrorists. Despite these efforts, the fugitives continued to evade capture. In every safe house they abandoned, investigators found traces of their presence but never arrived in time to arrest them. However, one important detail became clear. The radicals never seemed to be short on money, which meant they would need to commit another robbery soon. Agent John Markey made an intriguing calculation. He noticed a pattern in the 4 most recent bank robberies in upstate New York. By dividing the total stolen amount by the number of days between each heist, he estimated that the group needed approximately $737 per day to sustain their operations. This allowed him to predict when they would strike again. His estimate was spot on. On June 9, 1984, the group robbed a bank in Norfolk, Virginia. As in previous heists, 3 armed individuals entered the building. 2 immediately vaulted over the counter, while 1 remained near the entrance. They ignored the money in the teller drawers, taking only the fresh cash that had just been delivered by an armored truck. The group's tactics were evolving. By avoiding cash from teller drawers, they eliminated the risk of grabbing dye packs that would stain the stolen money. They were learning from each heist, becoming more precise and harder to catch. Investigators knew they needed a new approach. The fugitives were careful, but no matter how disciplined they were, everyone makes a mistake eventually. That mistake came in the summer of 1984. On August 4th, the owner of a storage facility in Binghamton, New York, contacted the FBI. A tenant had stopped paying rent, and after waiting the required time, the facility manager opened the unit to prepare for an auction. But what he found inside left him shaken. Agents rushed to the scene and were stunned by the contents. The storage unit was filled with bomb-making manuals, firearms training guides, research documents on major corporations, and radical leftist literature. Most alarming of all, they found detailed blueprints for constructing bombs, featuring a specific type of timer with brass screws, the same unique design found in previous unexploded bombs linked to the terrorist group. This was a connection we had been looking for, one agent later recalled. The bomb components matched those found at attack sites, stretching back years. Among the hundreds of pieces of evidence, one small detail changed everything. An old seed catalog with an address label still attached. The name on the label, Jack Horning. Tracking down Horning led investigators to a home in Connecticut. But when they arrived, the neighbors had unexpected news. The Horning family had moved away years ago. It seemed like another dead end. But one officer decided to keep asking around and found a babysitter who had once worked for the Horning family. She remembered them well. The parents seemed normal, and the children were polite. Nothing about the family had ever seemed suspicious. Then she hesitated. There was this one thing, she said. One day, the mother was driving me somewhere, and we got into a car accident. That was the lead investigators needed. They checked with the Connecticut Department of Motor Vehicles, looking for an accident report matching the date and location the babysitter mentioned. At first, they found no record of a Mrs. Horning. But then, a report surfaced that matched everything, except for the name. The woman involved in the accident had given a completely different name to the police. Judy Hames. Now, the FBI had a new alias to track. With the name Judy Hames, investigators traced her movements through DMV records. They discovered that her Connecticut driver's license had expired years ago, but before that happened, she had exchanged it for a New York license. Later, that license was swapped for an Ohio license, which was still active. This meant one thing. She was still out there. The new address linked to her Ohio driver's license led the FBI to a post office box in Columbus. This was a common tactic used by the terrorist group. They rarely use residential addresses, preferring mail drops to avoid being tracked. Determined to catch them, the FBI set up a 24-hour surveillance operation near the post office. Agents rented a house across the street and installed hidden cameras, watching every person who accessed a mailbox. For weeks, nothing happened. Then, on November 3rd, 1984, something changed. A woman arrived at the post office and retrieved mail from the suspect's box. Agents immediately identified her as Raymond Levasseur's wife. This was their first major visual confirmation of any member of the group in over a decade. Instead of arresting her, they followed her, hoping she would lead them straight to Levasseur and the others. She was careful. She frequently changed lanes, pulled over for no reason, and seemed to check for possible tails. The agents kept their distance, using aerial surveillance when needed. After 2.5 hours, she finally arrived at a house in Deerfield, Ohio. The FBI watched as she parked and entered the home. About 20 minutes later, a man stepped outside, got into a car, and drove away. It was Richard Williams, the fugitive wanted for the murder of Philip Lamonaco. Agents followed him to a safe house in Cleveland, now surveilling 2 locations, one in Deerfield, where Levasseur was believed to be, and one in Cleveland, where Williams was hiding. They decided to wait for the perfect moment to strike. At 9:40 a.m. the next morning, Levasseur and his wife left their house. The FBI moved in. SWAT teams surrounded them, cutting off any escape. Levasseur surrendered immediately. The moment news of his arrest reached Cleveland, law enforcement there raided Williams' hideout. He, too, surrendered without a fight. After years of pursuit, in just a single hour, 2 of the 3 most wanted domestic terrorists in America were captured. Now, only Thomas Manning and his wife remained at large. Under interrogation, Williams refused to talk for hours. But eventually, he broke. He gave up 3 addresses in Jefferson, Ohio, one of which he claimed was Manning's hideout. The FBI moved in fast, raiding the location before Manning had time to disappear. Inside, they found handguns, fake IDs, $32,000 in cash, radios tuned to FBI frequencies, explosives, and more bomb-making materials. Most importantly, they found a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Forensic tests confirmed it was the same gun used to murder Officer Philip Lamonaco. Even though they had finally found a murder weapon, the serial number had been filed off. But forensic specialists used a chemical restoration process to recover the number. The pistol was traced back to a gun store in Norfolk, Virginia, where it had been purchased by Deborah Manning, Thomas Manning's wife. This finally gave the FBI a direct connection between Manning and the murder of Philip Lamonaco. Now, they just had to catch him. After weeks of surveillance, agents spotted Deborah Manning retrieving mail from another post office box in Virginia Beach. They didn't arrest her immediately. Instead, they followed her. She led them to another safe house in Norfolk, where she and Thomas Manning had been hiding. A team was deployed to watch the house. A short time later, Manning stepped outside into his yard, unarmed. That's when agents made their move. Without a struggle, Thomas Manning, the last fugitive of the radical terrorist group, was finally arrested. 3 years later, in 1987, Manning stood trial for the murder of Philip Lamonaco. Lamonaco's widow, Donna, attended the trial. "It was important for me to be there," she said. "I needed to hear exactly what had happened. I needed to be sure that these were the people who killed Phil." Manning was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Richard Williams, after a mistrial in 1991, was retried and also sentenced to life for Lamonaco's murder. Deborah Manning was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Raymond Levasseur, though never charged with the murder, was found guilty of domestic terrorism and sentenced to 45 years in prison. His wife was released after serving several months in custody. Reflecting on the case, one investigator summed it up simply. They called themselves revolutionaries, freedom fighters. But in the end, they were just criminals, murderers, nothing more. Years after Philip Lamonaco's death, New Jersey State Police officers still visit his grave. One officer put it best. It felt like, finally, we had earned his respect. We had done right by him. We had done our best to bring justice. To this day, people continue to leave flowers and flags along the New Jersey highway he once patrolled.